Good morning, church. This is Don here, and I hope you're having a great day. It's a blessing to be here. We're going to talk about Psalm 107 today. And the theme of Psalm 107 is about the goodness and the mercy of our God. Verse 1 says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever." And we see this, it will be repeated a few more times throughout this psalm. It's referring to the redeemed of the Lord, which back in the Old Testament times was his people who were scattered throughout the four lands, and they were all coming back to Israel. The psalmist gives us four examples of different peoples that were coming back that the Lord saved, to show us how good and how merciful he truly is. So the first group of people, the first example that we're given is verses 4 through 9. And these are the people who are wandering in the desert, in the wilderness, in a desolate way. They had found no city to dwell in. They were hungry and they were thirsty, and it says that their souls fainted in them. They came to a point where they were ready to give up. They had nowhere to go. They were lost, and they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. And it says that the Lord delivered them out of their distresses. He led them forth by the right way, that they might go to a city for a dwelling place. So the second example, the second group of people that we see is verses 10 through 16. And these were people who had rebelled against the Lord. So the Lord had bound them up in affliction and irons, it says, which basically they went into prison and they were forced into hard labor. This was a form of the Lord's discipline. He brought them to a place where they had no choice but to cry out to the Lord. They knew they couldn't get delivered by their own strength. And it says that when they cried out to the Lord, he saved them out of their distress. He broke their chains and brought them out of darkness. The third example we see here is those who were afflicted and sick because of their transgressions and iniquities. So in other words, their own sins had caused them to become sick and afflicted to the point where they were near death and they didn't even want to eat. This is kind of an example of the Lord, had brought them to a place where even their own sins were no longer pleasurable. And the only thing that they could do was to cry out to the Lord. And they did. They cried out to the Lord, and it says that he sent his word and he healed them. So then we come to the fourth and the final group of people here. And these are people who their line of work was to work in the sea on ships. And they had run into a storm. And they were fearful for their own lives. The power of the sea was overwhelming, and they had become terrified. And they cried out to the Lord, and the Lord delivered them as well by calming the storm and guiding them to their desired haven. So we might want to see, how does this apply to us today? Well, it's not really that hard to see. Have we ever felt like we were lost out in the wilderness, far from God? Have you ever rebelled against God? Have you ever relied on yourself, not needing God, doing things on your own? Or have you allowed a sin in your life to take over and bring you to a point of despair or depression? Or have you faced a storm in your life? Could be a sickness, it could be unemployment, it could be loss of loved ones, whatever's going on. All of us have faced storms, and many of us have allowed sin in our lives. Many of us have felt like we've been in the wilderness, lost. What we can get from these Psalms is that no matter what we find ourselves in, whether it's just through circumstance or even from our own sin and poor choices, if we just cry out to God, if we just ask him to come back and save us, he'll do that. He promises us that. And when that happens, we need to be grateful. We need to proclaim his goodness. We need to tell others about all the good things that he's done for us. And gratitude is an amazing thing. It does a couple of things for us. One, it takes away pride, because when we're grateful, we're acknowledging that somebody else has done something good for us, and we're putting them above our own selves. The second thing it does is it honors God, and God deserves our honor more than we could possibly give to him. And the third thing that gratitude can do is it can show that we have a repentant heart. If we're grateful for things that God's done, or if we're grateful that he's forgiven us for sin, that's part of the repentance process. Now, in the next section, which is verses 33 through 38, we see that God has power, ultimate power, and he can change circumstances. He can change things. He can bring curses on the land because of people's wickedness, and he can bless the land for those who are upright. And cursing was generally meant as a punishment for disobedience, but it's also a form of discipline. God always brings discipline and punishment as a way to turn us back towards him. And we see that he has that ultimate power. And we also see that in the Old Testament, when people walked with God, they were blessed. And if they rebelled against him, they were facing curses. And God has the right to do that to us. Now, the psalm ends with verse 43. And what that says is that whoever is wise will observe these things, and they will understand the loving kindness of the Lord. So in other words, when we're wise, we understand that whether we're suffering or we're afflicted or we're going through storms or whatever, God uses all those things for our good. And he's always doing things. And even when he saves us out of those things, it shows his goodness towards us. And when we have wisdom, we will see the goodness of God in all of these things. So I hope you all got something out of this. I hope that you would give thanks to the Lord for all that he's done for you. And I would hope that you would proclaim his goodness to those who you know that don't know God. Hope you have a blessed day. It's been a privilege to do this. Good night.